All right, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Jillian Medill, and welcome to our Salesforce Admin webinar today about processes. In fact, I guess my name is actually Jillian Bruce, not Jillian Medill. I keep doing that. I got married a few months ago, so I'm still adjusting to the new last name. We have an amazing guest speaker today, Ben Balapew. He did a version of this exact same presentation at Dreamforce this year, and it was the top-rated session of all of the admin tracks. So we're really excited to bring it to you via webinar today. Before we get going, we, with every Salesforce presentation, have our amazing forward-looking statement slide. This is just a reminder to only make purchasing decisions based on currently available features and functionality. Not going to be a problem today because in fact we're not showing you anything inside of Salesforce. We are talking entirely about processes and soft skills here. We have a lot of resources and ways for you to connect with us. So first question that we always get, is this webinar being recorded? Yes, it is definitely being recorded. And in fact, if you go on admin.salesforce.com right now, you'll be able to see the slides already posted up there, and the recording will be available shortly after this webinar has ended. Please connect with us via social. We are at Salesforce Admins No I on Twitter. We also have a Facebook account and YouTube where you can find all of our past webinars and presentations as well. Now, for this webinar, if you want to ask questions, which we highly encourage you to ask questions, please go on the Success community. We have an amazing webinar group on the Success community. Use that bit.ly, capital A, admin, capital W, webinar, capital G, group. Those capitals are important for bit.ly links. But you can find us really easily on the Success community. Ask your question there. We've got experts standing by, and if we don't get to your question during the webinar, I promise we will answer it after. We'll also have a little bit of time, hopefully, for Q&A at the end. But again, please feel free to ask your question in there, and we will get back to you. With that, I'm going to hand it off to the one and only business process guru, Ben Balapew. Take it away.
Thanks very much, Jillian. So, on today's call, we're going to really dig into the nuts and bolts of requirements and processes and solutions. We're going to be talking briefly about efficiency enhancement methods, and more than anything, we hope to be empowering you to improve your existing processes and question things. That's a really big part of today, is questioning things. So, throughout my professional career, I've worked in operations, continuous improvement, marketing, sales, and then just recently, as of the last year, moved into IT. And it wasn't that long after becoming an admin that I started seeing these parallels between my old job as a CI coordinator and my current job as a Salesforce admin. So today we're going to talk through some of those parallels. Throughout this webinar, we're going to be focusing on the somewhat nebulous topic of processes and what we can do to, one, make them successful, two, make them efficient, and three, make them solutions, because there's a difference between a process and a solution. We're not going to be talking about how to apply any specific technologies to improve processes. There are so many people out there that are just genius level people that can help you with whatever your technical need is. Today, we're not going to take that spotlight from them. We're simply going to be talking about processes today. The requirements come first, the technology comes last. And I'm hoping that by the end of this call, we're all going to agree with that. We should all have a basic understanding of what requirements are. You may think you know, but we're going to make sure the fundamental components of any process. The concept of functional processes versus refined solutions. We're going to talk a little bit about some terminology, so continuous improvement, lean methodologies. We're going to be familiar with non-value-added activities or waste, and I want you guys to be able to spot the low-hanging fruit in a process. So, when evaluating or working with a process of any kind, now I don't care what it is, it can be a sales flow process, customer return process, the process of requesting a quote, doesn't matter. The application of technology should be the last thing that you do. You'll have your own details, but in general, your methodology could be you start with this, and then you do the next thing, which is followed by whatever, and lastly, once all that's done, we can focus on this, and then only then do we actually start talking about technology. There's so much that comes before the technology. And why is that? It's because you don't know. Until you've gone through a fair amount of documentation and discovery work, there's a ton that you might not know. You might not know who the primary stakeholders are, what the pre-metrics look like, what your objectives are, because remember, objectives lead to goals, and then goals are the final part here, and then actual requirements. You probably don't have a good feel for what the actual requirements. You don't know what you don't know, right? How can you say that, and I'm doing air quotes, sorry, it's a webinar, this is the right tool for the job if you don't know those things? So, what is a process? Let's take a look at that. We've got an example here. Hopefully everybody that's on the call today has at some point in time made a meal, right? So this is very, very simple. And it's a very straightforward example that hopefully everybody can relate to, right? At a high level, you got gathering, cooking, place setting, and then consuming, okay? Taking in a little bit closer to Zoom, you visit the grocery store, you purchase the ingredients, you return home, you turn on a stove, you put food into a pan, you turn off the heat, you put food into a plate, you get some utensils, you put food in your mouth, you chew, you swallow. The digestive process takes over after that, and I'm not going to actually get any further down the process line, but you get the point. That is all a process. Your morning routine, your drive to the office, your washing your hands, getting gas, going to the bathroom, making a meal, all these things, while being vastly different in intention, are processes. So what is a process? Literally, all processes, or it's anything that has a start, a cause and effect, and an end. So all processes have the initiation point, they've got processing, so a little bit of back and forth, and they have a conclusion. Everything that has those three things, guess what? It's a process. So what's a requirement? And I promise you we're going to tie all of these things together at the end, and you're going to go, oh, that's why we spend so much time doing this. So what's a requirement? Everybody on the line has been given requirements of some sort. You've been told, in order to be successful, this needs to happen. That's a very nebulous, kind of lots of gray area involved term for requirement, or definition of requirement. In my career, I've refined my definition of requirement to this. Requirements are the unambiguous, concise, verifiable, and necessary results of a process. So looking at the words in blue here, unambiguous, it's got to be clearly defined. Concise results, there's no fluff, no gray area. Verifiable results, empirical or repeatably provable. That's what I mean by verifiable. Empirical, you've observed it, repeatably provable. And necessary, it's got to be essential or indispensable. So they're the reason why we go through these processes in the first place. So I told you guys that there's a difference between a functional process and a solution. So what is a solution? Solutions are refined, focused, and often specialized means of solving a problem or fulfilling requirements. So again, let's go through the blue words. Refined. Refined means iteratively improved upon. They're living mechanisms, right? They should be expected and need to change over time or continuously improve, right? Focused, tightly scoped, again, no gray area. Specialized, and it's meant to be, that means it's meant to be applied to a specific set of scenarios. So contrasting the two, processes versus solutions. On one side, we've got processes which are literally any series of actions or steps taken in order to achieve a particular end. On the solution side, refined, focused, specialized means of solving a problem or fulfilling requirements, oftentimes meant to be applied to a specific set of scenarios. So next thing, before we move on any further, we need to talk a little bit about efficiency enhancement methods. So another way of saying efficiency enhancement methods, in my experience, is CI, or continuous improvement. As the name CI implies, this is an unending initiative. It's continuous. It doesn't end. So CI, in my definition and the definition of many others, it's a general practice of people leveraging various tools to better the efficiency of processes. So various tools. We've all heard terms Six Sigma. We've all heard terms like lean or agile. If you're in production operations, maybe it's SMED or JIT, just-in-time technology, or JIP, just-in-time production. There's a billion variables on those, but it's a general practice is what it is. And like I said, it's unending. So we're going to take a look at two different sides of this. On the one side, we've got lean, which is pretty simple, right? It's usually the tool that you'll pull out of your continuous your continuous improvement toolbox when you know what the problem is. You can look at the process overall and say, there's my bottleneck. You're going to pull out lean, right? It's a methodical focus on the elimination of waste and the creation of standardized processes. It's simple, it's visual, it's usually very quick to deploy. That's lean. On the other end of the spectrum, you've got Six Sigma. So Six Sigma is a more scientific approach to determine what problems are when they're not really obvious. You use a statistical reduction of variation, and you standardize processes, analyze data to determine unknown root causes. So if I know that somewhere in my process there's a problem, but I can't put my finger on what the bottleneck is, or perhaps what the actual root cause of the issue is, I can use Six Sigma and my analysis of data collected on a process to determine what the actual problem is. So in the interest of time, we're going to focus, the CI portion of today on lean. Lean is simple and it's pretty easy to kind of wrap your mind around. So we're going to go down that path. So lean is all about the methodical elimination of waste. And waste is anything that doesn't add value or aid in the meeting of stated/vetted/accepted requirements, right? Those three words, I want you to kind of focus on those for a second. Stated requirements that are vetted, that are accepted. So I want you to be questioners. I want you to look at things objectively and say, does this really qualify as a vetted, and do I accept that these are requirements as they are, kind of based on the criteria that we covered already. So today, moving forward, we're going to see how 6 generally accepted forms of waste can keep processes from becoming solutions. So what is waste? Waste, like I said, is anything that doesn't add value or aid in the meeting of stated requirements. Let's go through this wheel of waste here, starting with rework. Rework is quite simply redoing things. If you need to do something a second time to get it right, the initial time you spent doing it in the first place was waste. Right? It makes sense, pretty intuitive. You have to go back and redo it. The first time you did it, I'm sorry, it was a waste of your time. Next up, we've got motion and conveyance. This is unnecessary movement of people or things such as data, right? So that's motion and conveyance. Physically moving things from point A to point B, or perhaps we're talking about a scenario where you're moving data from point A to point B when it's inevitably going to end up over at point C anyways, right? If we know that it's going to end up at point C, why are we taking the time to go through the ETL process of getting it from A to B? Right? Let's skip B. Let's skip that wasteful step in B, because there's a lot of prep work that comes into moving data, right? So we're going to skip over that and go right to C, if we can still meet the requirements in doing so. Overproduction. Overproduction, going too far above and beyond. I hope that we all know people like this in the example I'm about to give, because they're usually generally quite pleasant people to have around, but they're the folks that say things like, I know you only asked me to get pricing for product A, but since I was in the book anyways, I pulled it for products B and C as well. It wasn't a big deal. That's overproduction. That's going too far above and beyond, and it is a big deal. If it doesn't add value or aid in the meeting of a specific requirement, it is by definition waste. I may have been able to, or I may have needed, I should say, to use that person's time that they spent getting information on products B and C. I may have needed that person's time at another point in the process. And so now, by them going too far above and beyond, they've inadvertently pushed the rest of the process back. So processing. This one's quite close to overproduction. It's doing things unnecessarily or added steps. So think about this one in terms of, I would have been able to do my job right away, but I had to dig this up and then the other thing that came up before I could actually move forward and do the thing that I intended to do. Doing things unnecessarily, non-value added things, I should say, unnecessarily. That's processing. So this one is a big one for me. Underutilization of human resources, and that's not the HR department at your company. That's referring to wasted talent. So wasted talent is a talent not used to improve the efficiency of a process. So we often assume that people's abilities are evident in our day-to-day interactions with them, right? And this mentality often leads to typecasting or pigeonholing them. So talking to people as humans, it really does seem to have become a bit of a lost art. So what is waste? Waiting. This is a very straightforward one. Any time that's spent waiting for the previous step in a process to be completed. So let's reference that overproduction one. If I'm asked to get information on product A and I spend some time, extra time getting information on product B and C, I am creating the waste of waiting because now everybody that's downline from me in this process is waiting for me. In that scenario, twice, 3 times as long as they should have had to before. So let's talk a little bit about empowering you to improve, right? In empowering you to improve, I want you to be able to find the low-hanging fruit. I want you to be able to identify things in your processes, take from today's webinar, go home, go back to your offices, or maybe you just unplug and start walking around your offices and try and just see these things. So we're going to go through an example here. It's a little bit more real-life example-ish to help aid that along. So this is our final example, right? So keeping in mind the concept of waste and solutions, let's run through this. And remember, we're not going to solve anything today. The technology comes last, and we are definitely not there. So let's talk about James, right? We'll use our imagination for a second here. There's a person named James, and although he's been with Acme, this company, for a few years, he's recently moved into the position of Salesforce admin. Hooray, good job. One of James's first projects as an admin has him working with the sales and customer service teams to get their quotation process into Salesforce. Having been given little direction or authority, unfortunately I think some of you guys can relate, but complete responsibility for the success of the project, James decides to talk to his users, see what the current process looks like, and get a feel for what he's gotten himself into. So before we move on to the next slide here, you'll see at the bottom of this one, it says Savoir. And if you've ever seen Mike Gerhold present on things, a lot of times he'll bring up this concept of Savoir, or Salesforce administration by walking around. Human interaction, talking to actual people, it's becoming a lost art, a bit of a lost art, and it can be such a valuable thing. Just, taking the time to go around and talk to your users, talk to your coworkers, see how they're doing things. You learn so much in doing that. So thank you, Mr. Gerhold, for evangelizing that concept of just getting out Salesforce administration by walking around. All right, so next slide here. Let's take a look at this process, okay? It starts with sales, goes to customer service for 3 of the steps, and ends up back at sales. Zooming in a little bit, we've got phone or email, to customer support requesting a quote. Customer will do that. And then documents details in Excel. This is customer service now. They email supervisors stuff monthly. They look up prices in a binder. They fill out some paper forms. They scan paper forms. They email the forms back to the salesperson. The salesperson then attaches the form to an email and sends them out to the oh man, this is just a disgusting process. If you're going, oh, you should be able to do this in Salesforce, and you can do a quote in Salesforce, and I get that. I swear to you, I understand. And I'm happy that you're thinking of those solutions, but we need to stop thinking about the solutions because the technology comes last. Let's take a look at this step by step, right? In a little bit slower fashion, mind you. It starts with sales. Sales will receive a request for quote from the customer, and that comes in one of 2 ways, either by phone or by email. After that, customer service will document the details of this request, and the documentation typically takes place in an Excel workbook. Each member of the customer service team has their own local copy of the workbook that gets emailed to their supervisor at the end of each month, presumably for reporting purposes. Customer service has a binder that contains the tiered pricing structure of every product made by Acme. They reference this binder while filling out a paper quote form. Only one copy of this binder exists as to ensure products are quoted accurately, right? Because if they had a couple copies of that book, they'd have to update a couple of copies of that book every time it changes, and nobody wants to do that. That's a hassle, right? So let's keep it at one. Um, so eventually, customer service will scan and email a completed quote back to the salesperson that originally requested it. Sales will take the quote, attach it to an email, and then they'll send it back to the customer. Okay? So overall, if we look at that, soup to nuts, the process here, we should have heard that the requirement was to get the customer a quote. There's all this stuff. On the next slide here, you'll see a visualization of the entire process, soup to nuts again. And at the very beginning, you have somebody coming in and saying, I need a quote. At the very end of it, you have somebody getting a quote. The requirement is get the customer a quote. Remember, anything that gets a customer a quote can be considered a functional process, but that's not where we want to be. We don't want to be at a functional process. We want to have solutions. So that's coming. Let's take a look. In talking with his users, Sabois, right, James learns that those involved with it aren't very happy with the process. Let's take a look at what Cheryl, a CSR, customer service representative, says when asked about the process, right? She says, sometimes sales call while I'm at lunch. Have you ever tried filling out a quote form while listening to a voicemail? It seems that they forget to include half the required details about half the time. Now that means I got to call them back or email them with questions and wait for a response before I can finish their quotes. Cheryl sounds as though she spends a lot of time struggling through voicemails and waiting on responses. So if I were asked, and if I were to ask any of you, I would hope that you'd look at it and say, that's definitely waiting. There's processing that's in there. She's unnecessarily tracking down details. And it sounds like she has to do some rework every once in a while as well. These forms of waste can fit directly into her scenario. I mean, the definitions of them can be found in her scenario. Let's take a look at another scenario. James goes over and he talks to Brian, who's also in customer service. And Brian says, and when we get to the end of this, okay, we'll get to that in a minute, sorry. Brian says, what we do is simple. We get a request, we go to Cheryl, we get a blank form, we go to the bookcase to get the price book, which weighs 50 pounds. We try to figure out what the salesperson actually needs. We complete and send out a quote form. And lastly, we wait for the complaints of inaccuracy to come in so that we can redo the entire process with the right information. I could save us all a lot of time if they just let me put this stuff into Access. I know it's a webinar, and I know that I can't hear you, but if I could hear you, I would hope they'd be hearing things like, ooh, oh no, not Access. Yes, but Brian does a surprising amount of walking. And he seems to have a skill set beyond those required to be a CSR, right? If I asked you what you heard as far as forms of waste, definitely there's some motion because dude's getting up and he's walking around, right? There's rework that's involved. And the biggest one comes in that last line when he says, I could save us all a lot of time if they just let me put this stuff all into Access. That is an underutilization of human resources. Well, Brian is a fantastic CSR. I'm confident that he is. He's really good at his job. He has the ability to set up Access databases. That is not a skill I would assume that somebody in customer service would have. And I wouldn't know that about him or anyone if I didn't get up and actually ask the person, if I didn't actually talk to the person about it. So motion, rework, underutilization of human resources, those three forms of waste are really evident with Brian. Let's take a look at sales, right? That's the other side of the aisle. And we're going to talk to Rosa. And Rosa says, things work fine. So long as you don't mind waiting a week to find out that customer service didn't get something right, and you'll need to either wait another week for them to correct it, or you get their supervisor to expedite your request. I get around this by keeping a stack of blank quote forms handy. If ever I need a quote, I just fill out as much as I can, send it over to customer service to fill out the rest. I'm only a 20-minute drive away, so I'll often just deliver a hard copy too, just in case. All right, now, while Rosa's methods are thorough and proactive, and I'm sure she's just a gem, she's real nice to be around, she's taking things into her own hands. Now, which is dangerous, right? And spending time doing things that she really shouldn't have to do. Identified forms of waste in this one, every last one of them. Everyone. There's rework, there's motion and conveyance, there's processing, overproduction, underutilization of human resources, and waiting. She's spending time doing things that she really shouldn't have to do. She's redoing things. And it sounds like she may actually have a couple of abilities that are above her job description, above her job requirements. We would not have known these things had we not just gone out and started talking to people, right? That saboteur thing that Mike Gerhold evangelizes on is awesome. So, um, in conclusion, right? We're all people that are involved with processes. We have the ability to ask questions, to seek out opportunities for improvement, and based on real requirements, vetted, agreed upon requirements, we have the ability to start producing solutions. So these solutions should be looked at as vastly improved starting points over their functional process predecessors, where now, only now, and finally, the technology can come into the picture. So I hope our time today has shed a little light on what process waste is, giving you the ability to identify some of that low-hanging fruit and the confidence to question things, talk to people, and go out and find stuff. So thanks very much for your time, everyone.
Thank you so much, Ben. That was amazing. I love hearing your presentation. We got a lot of great conversations happening on Twitter, Success Community, and I've got a couple questions for you. So the first question we've got is, how does a process fit in project management, or is project management executed after a process is defined? That's from Abel Adamu. I'm sure I'm butchering his last name.
That's a fantastic question. It's a chicken or the egg thing, right? Which comes in front of the other? Hopefully, ideally, you would have a process that you or your group of people or your company uses to manage projects. So it's a hierarchy, really. At a very high level, you've got a very flexible process. Ideally, you'd have a very flexible process that you use to manage a wide array of projects. Going down to the next level in the hierarchy, if you will, is the actual project level. Given the traits of a certain project, you're going to have facets of your overall methodology that you can use to manage that process of actually, going through the project, soup to nuts, meeting those requirements. The biggest thing that I see as a setback for a lot of people, and where projects don't end up as successful as they could have, is that, scope creep is an obvious one, but losing sight of the requirements, the stated, the vetted, the agreed upon, empirical, requirements, that's a shot in the foot. It really is to any project. So making sure that you've got your methodology, your processes agreed upon for how you want to manage your projects, and then let that bleed down into the lower levels of the hierarchy. So that's a great question.
Okay, I got one more quick question for you, and then we are going to wrap it up. Do you have any suggestions to improve collaboration when developing processes?
Absolutely, absolutely. So visual. There are a couple of visual mapping tools that are out there, one of which I really enjoy using. If you go to the URL elements.cloud, it's a process mapping solution, and it's free, and it's meant to be used with teams. It is really intuitive. It is amazingly intuitive, as a matter of fact. I used to use things like Visio, and in some instances I use PowerPoint, whatever your mapping solution is, and they all had their strengths and their weaknesses. I will never go back to using those things again after using elements.cloud. So it's a free thing. I'm not in any way, shape, or form associated with them. I just really like their product, and it's free. You can't beat free. So I would say have a visual aid. That everybody has access to. Put it up in front of them. Keep that front and center. Keep your requirements front and center. That's the big thing. Requirements drive processes. Processes create solutions. They lead there anyways. Elements can help your entire team do that. So we've also got a couple of related posts that are over on my website, the sfdcgeek.com, and then there's also a website that we've been working on. If you're on Twitter, you may have heard of a group called the Gift Squad, and we do fundraisers and such like that. any case, we're all going to be blogging on that site for a bit here. That's thegiftsquad.com. So you can go to those sites and find a ton of stuff. Ton of stuff. Thegiftsquad.com, that's a new website, so not so much there. My site's got a bunch of stuff. Also, feel free to reach out to me on any of the methods that you can find me. Wherever you find me, ask me a question. I'm happy to help.
Thank you so much, Ben. There was an amazing wealth of information you shared today. I want to remind everyone on the webinar that we have tons of resources available to you, not only the ones that Ben just mentioned, but we also have a great podcast that we've done with Ben on the Salesforce Admin podcast. Trailhead is always a great way to learn more about process automation and business analysis. There is a super safe harbor, more of this kind of content coming on Trailhead in the nearish future. There's also a great Dreamforce session you can watch where it's an expanded version of the same presentation. We thank you so much for joining us today. Remember, you can always connect with us at admin.salesforce.com or at SalesforceAdmins on Twitter. And stay tuned for the recording of this webinar to be posted shortly. Thanks, everyone. I hope you have an absolutely wonderful Wednesday. Take care.